So, Abraham Lincoln, we have this backwoods lawyer with a single year of schooling who somehow outgrew every polished man around him and became one of the most consequential leaders in human history. So, what do we need to understand? What can we possibly understand at a 10,000-foot level about Lincoln that made it all possible? What was it about Lincoln's mind that made this man do what he did?
Almost nobody continues to go up in my estimation as I get older and older, but Lincoln is one of the people who does. And Lincoln is, quite frankly, a mystery to me. I don't see how you get Abraham Lincoln out of someone who came from his very poor background. You said he had a year of schooling. You're being very generous to him there. He didn't even really have a year of formal schooling. And you end up with a person who is the most eloquent president we've ever had by a very wide margin, and I think even more eloquent than Jefferson, and who is able to distill into the fewest possible words the most complex ideas and topics imaginable, and just have them ring in a way that almost no one is able to do. He is someone, he had an ego, but I think one of his real gifts was the ability to put his ego aside and keep his eye on the goal. He was able to really focus, and he focused relentlessly on number one, suppressing the rebellion and restoring the Union, but also he hated the institution of slavery. He's not an abolitionist, but he hated the institution of slavery, and he was very happy to see that slavery was added to the roster of what the United States would insist on at the end of the war. He's able to let all the other things go. He can pay attention to many things, but he never loses his principal focus, was how do I maintain this great war? And it's really hard to get people to understand the scope of the Civil War. There are 31 million people in the United States then, about a shade more than 3 million put on uniforms. It would be as if we had 35 to 40 million people under arms. Now, for the Confederates, it would be like having more like 55 million people under arms as a percentage of the population. The dead would be between 6 million and 7.5 million, depending on how you count it. The scope is just, during the Gulf Wars, New York Times put a picture of every United States service person who was killed, put a picture in the paper over the scope of those wars. And that is about as many people as were shot in a few hours at Antietam. It's just very different to get students now to understand the different scale. And that's what Lincoln's dealing with. How do I keep the focus on a war that is becoming far more costly than anyone imagined, and eating up our young manpower at a rate that there's never been anything in our history to prepare the United States for this. The Winfield Scott captured Mexico City with an army of fewer than 15,000 during the war with Mexico. U.S. Grant has 120,000. I mean, the whole scale is just so different that it's hard to come to terms with, and that's what Lincoln was dealing with. I think the fact that he was willing to surround himself with really able counselors is important. Who does he put in his cabinet? He puts his main rivals in the cabinet. He put William Henry Seward in his cabinet, who's the most famous Republican in the country. He put Salmon P. Chase, who's a very smart and effective and ambitious person from Ohio, in his cabinet. He surrounds himself with people who are capable and energetic and have their own ambitions. He's not afraid to do that. All of whom had far better educations than he had and didn't have a rural backwoods accent like he did. It's also a measure of how confident he was. He didn't pretend to talk away. He did, to talk in a fashion that he didn't actually talk. He would have pronounced words in ways that anybody who went to Harvard would just sneer at. He didn't, and he knew they sneered, and he didn't care, because eventually all of them, except the ones with only a 20-watt bulb, figured out that Lincoln was actually probably smarter than they were and had a better grasp of things than they did, and brought them around. He really brought Seward around, which is very impressive.
Yeah, there's so many fascinating things about Lincoln. So backwoods of Kentucky, and Kentucky is a very important state in this story. And the right words, the right speeches, the right debates at this moment in history, it really does make me wonder, if Lincoln didn't exist, if certain humans in history didn't exist, that everything could have turned out very differently.
The great forces are all that matters and individuals don't really matter notion of history, I think, is ridiculous. Individuals really matter. For the United States, Lincoln and Grant matter beyond calculation in this war. And on the Confederate side, if you take Lee out of the picture, the war doesn't last nearly as long as it does. In fact, we'll talk about this later probably. I think it could have ended early in the summer of 1862 with slavery still intact. I mean, in a perverse way, Lee furthers the cause of emancipation because he extends the war long enough that the United States says, we have to do this. We've got to get rid of slavery to defeat the rebels.
So, and also on the psychological side, Lincoln is a fascinating study because he carried deep depression all his life.
He had black moods in his life. Yes, he did.
And so for somebody that has to go through an all-encompassing war, to be able to sort of survive through that, to think through that without an education, without any acquired skill that enables him to be a commander-in-chief during a time of war. He's got nothing in the toolbox, and yet he steps up.
If you looked at his resume and Jefferson Davis's in 1860 and said, okay, here are the two guys who are going to be your respective commanders-in-chief. Who do you want on your team? Yeah. Lincoln had no administrative experience beyond running a little law office. He had 1 2-year term in the House of Representatives in terms of national government. He had no military service to speak of, a little while in the Black Hawk War as a junior officer in the Black Hawk War. Didn't check any of the education boxes, as you said. Jefferson Davis was a graduate of West Point. He'd commanded more men in the war with Mexico than most of the men who commanded armies during the Civil War. He'd chaired the Senate Committee on Military Affairs. He'd been Secretary of War, a lot of administrative experience. He checked every box. Lincoln checked none of the boxes. And yet you got Lincoln as a commander-in-chief. It's really quite remarkable. He could listen to people that he thought knew more about something than he did. That's a quality that all of our presidents, to put it mildly, have not had. Lincoln did have that. He could listen. He could admit when he was wrong and change his mind about things. And he could put up with obnoxious behavior on the part of people that he thought might deliver the goods. And a perfect example of this is George Brinton McClellan, whom we'll talk about later, who was general-in-chief for a while, commanded the Army of the Potomac. In 1861, Lincoln and his Secretary of State, William Henry Seward, went to McClellan's house to talk to McClellan. Went to McClellan's house. The commander-in-chief goes to McClellan's house. McClellan wasn't there. The butler or somebody put them in a side room. McClellan came home, was told Lincoln was there. He went upstairs and then told the person who worked for him to go tell the president that he'd be happy to talk to him some other time. And so Lincoln just left. He never went back to see McClellan again, didn't pitch a fit, filed that away. Okay, McClellan's an ass, but I think he might win the war. I mean, he had that ability to do that, to put aside that kind of behavior on the part of someone if he thought they would deliver. He just has a number of qualities, I think, that are very unusual to find in someone. And as you say, he did have depressive moments, and we talk about what bad days presidents have now. Lincoln would have said, I'll take that president's worst day every day rather than the days that I get, for the most part. I mean, it's hard to imagine the burdens that he carried.
And at the right time, with just a handful of words, express something that no military could possibly do.
Explain what the war was about, why it was worth fighting, what it meant, his second inaugural address. I mean, when people went to hear the president give his second inaugural address on that cold day in 1865, what they wanted to hear, they finally beat the rebel scum from their point of view. Let's have some retribution here. What are we going to do to them? How are we going to make these people who brought this great war pay for this? And what does Lincoln tell them? He tells them, slavery caused it. Everybody knows that somehow that's the truth, and we're all implicated in it. I mean, he didn't tell them anything that they wanted to hear. that day. And it took great courage, I think, to do that at that moment, to tell an audience what they didn't want to hear. And he did it in the most eloquent language that any president's. That's the greatest speech in American history, the second inaugural, in my view.
With malice toward none, with charity for all, with firmness in the right as God gives us to see the right, let us strive on to finish the work we are in, to bind up the nation's wounds, to care for him who shall have borne the battle, and for his widow and his orphan, to do all which may achieve and cherish a just and lasting peace among ourselves and with all nations.
And we're all complicit in this because we all countenanced slavery. I mean, that's all in that one speech. And it's a short speech. The whole speech probably only lasted 8 or 9 minutes. And he also pays tribute to the citizen soldiers at the beginning of it, because he says that the war's going well, and we all know that everything depends on what our soldiers do. And by that he meant saving the Union, killing slavery. It all depends on them. And then he comes back and finishes with his tribute to the soldiers at the end.
And I have to say, the Gettysburg Address.
Oh, no, you can't.
If I may, it's only maybe 200 words.
Yep.
7 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Now we are engaged in a great civil war, testing whether that nation or any nation so conceived and so dedicated can long endure. We are met on a great battlefield of that war. We have come to dedicate a portion of that field as a final resting place for those who here gave their lives that that nation might live. It is altogether fitting and proper that we should do this. But in a larger sense, we cannot dedicate, we cannot consecrate, we cannot hallow this ground. The brave men, living and dead, who struggled here, have consecrated it far above our poor power to add or detract. The world will little note, nor long remember what we say here, but it can never forget what they did here. It is for us the living, rather, to be dedicated here to the unfinished work which they, who fought here, have thus far so nobly advanced. It is rather for us to be here dedicated to the great task remaining before us, that from these honored dead we take increased devotion to that cause for which they here gave the last full measure of devotion, that we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain, that this nation, under God, shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth. That's a big statement about what this country is about. It's about freedom.
And he comes back to, when most people read that, the very last part of it, they emphasize the prepositions: of the people, by the people, for the people.
Mm-hmm.
Lincoln, it's not about the prepositions. It's about the people. He earlier in the war referred to this as a people's contest. It's the people that are the key, the people who make up the republic, the people who will derive the freedoms and liberties that it's an amazing, and it probably took you 2 minutes to read that. He was finished before most people knew he had started at Gettysburg. Almost nobody heard him say that. The one thing wrong about it is when he said no one would remember very long what he said there. It's been remembered pretty well.